My name is Brett Olson. I am the creative director and co-founder of Renewing the Countryside, and have been working specifically in wholesale marketing and wholesale sales since 2004. So what we decided to do was to more or less get a panel here of two producers and two buyers, and let them introduce themselves and a little bit of their history. And I've got some canned questions on wholesale marketing and expectations if you don't have questions. So don't worry, we will fill the time well. And but if you do have questions, it's a small enough group that I think, even though nobody would sit at this table because you're all a bunch of Baptists and sitting in the back, that's fine. If you do have questions, I think we can take them on the fly. So first I'm going to just start at the end with Carla, because she's got the microphone, and have you introduce yourself and where you're from and a little bit of your own history in buying from local farms, which is fairly recent, within the last couple months, right?
My name is Carla Bloomberg, and I live part-time in Duluth and part-time in St. Paul. And I'm one of the owners of Sarah's Table in Duluth, and we've had that restaurant for about 20 years. Prior to that, I lived in Austin, Texas, and I owned a restaurant there. And then prior to that, I was a hippie farmer in the hill country of Texas. And so I've kind of seen it from both sides. I also, after my hippie farm days, went back to school and got a degree in biology so I could understand what was happening. And I guess that's about all I have to say about who I am. Was there something else you wanted me to say? Now I forgot. I'm sorry.
Well, you've said that you're, no, that's fine. Just for how long you've been buying from local farmers?
Okay, well, when I lived in Austin and had my restaurant in Austin, that was in the late 70s and early 80s. And the movement was just getting started with Alice Waters and people like that. And there was a couple of few restaurants in the Austin area that were doing so-called farm to table, including us. And there was a guy out by Lake Travis that had a fine dining place, and there was another guy in West Austin who had a fine dining place. And it's easier to do it in fine dining because you don't need as much stuff and you can charge way more. And so I've found in our restaurant in Duluth, in the beginning it was very difficult because the distribution system was kind of non-existent. There was no middlemen at all. I mean, the farmers that we dealt with were the farmers that walked in the back door. And that's, we started with Thousand Hills Cattle. I think we were their very first customer. And with Dave Rogotsky, who fishes up in Alaska for salmon and halibut, and Bodine's Fishery, and some guy over in Superior, I can't remember his name, and then later, we got Matt and some other people. Now we're using Peterson. Thousand Hills has just gotten way too big now. And I don't know exactly what to say now. It's really easy. I mean, are any of you guys farmers? How many are farmers? Is anybody a farmer? Okay. Well, I'm not sure I can tell you anything that's going to be useful, but it's just all about spending your winters, hustling, going and meeting restaurant owners and saying, do you want to buy my stuff? And here's what I have. And I would strongly advise you to concentrate on fine dining because that's where the bulk of the market is. And those people are just more flexible, and frequently you have a chef-owned or chef-driven restaurant where the guy who's making the buy is also the guy who's making the decisions, and they can just right on the spot say, yeah, we could use duck eggs, we could use quail eggs, yeah, we could use Romanesque or any kind of weird stuff that you happen to be growing. As far as being in Minnesota and using farm-to-table products, it's difficult, when you have 40 bushels of tomatoes in the last third week in August and none at any other time. I mean, I'm sure you guys all know that, so that's pretty obvious. And it's also in Minnesota with farm to table, it's pretty much all about the meat and the fish and, you know, mostly those kinds of things, the eggs. Those are the things that we can do year round. In the summer, when I was cooking, I've obviously aged out of it now, but when I was cooking, I could say to a guy who walked in the door, yeah, okay, I can use that tonight. I mean, we used to have a more fine dining style menu where whatever we had that night was what I decided I wanted to make. Now, because we're way busier than we were when we first opened and you know, we've kind of become a tourist destination and so forth. We have to have a much more organized and disciplined kitchen than we did in the beginning, and we have to have the same menu every day. We just can't manage to have you know, the kind of menu that where it's this piece of paper, oh yeah, we're having this tonight. So that kind of menu, you have to have a steady supply. And so the kinds of suppliers like Matt and like Peterson Meats and Dave Rogotsky and that can supply us year round, you know, where they have a freezer locker and they can go to their locker and they can get the stuff and they can bring it to us. That's the kind of stuff we can use. We can't, it's really hard for us to, like, I mean, throughout the time we've been in Duluth, there's in the summertime, spring and summer especially, there's guys who just walk in the backyard and say, well, I've got like a bushel of fiddleheads that I just picked in the woods, and you know, and we can sort of deal with those kinds of people, but it's hard. It takes extra time and effort and money, and as busy as we are now, and especially with the burden of the pandemic, we can't really do stuff like that like we used to be able to. So like I'm saying, I don't know what to tell you except that, you know, look for customers that have the flexibility of a menu that is not set in stone. I mean, less corporate, more individual, more fine dining, those kinds of places. Those are more likely where you're going to be able to make a deal with them for your
Yeah,
product.
and that's actually a nice segue for Nick, because I think that for you, the maybe not the complete opposite, but those staple vegetables, you know, yes, the problem of having 30 bushels of tomatoes is everybody has 30 bushels of tomatoes at the same time. You don't have the processing to, you know, freeze those. A few restaurants I know that are sort of more cafes have built systems around to do that. But, you know, you've got Food Farm who's going to have carrots for you all the way up until he's planting carrots. Tell me a little bit about how, where you're from and your little bit of background, what you do there, and how you approach local food procurement.
Sure. Can you hear me okay with the mask on? Is that fine? Yep. Okay. Yeah, so my name's Nick Saris. I'm the produce manager for Whole Foods Co-op in Duluth. I manage both of our produce departments at our 2 retail outlets in Duluth. And I've been with our co-op for about 8 years now. And I've worked exclusively in the produce department. And I was hired on as an assistant manager in the produce department when we were one store. Had the benefit of working under a very, very long tenured produce manager who's still with our organization. And quite frankly, didn't really know a whole lot about local food at all. And so it's, you know, it's been a learning experience for me. And something that I've become really passionate about. But now, you know, like I said, we have 2 stores and 2 sort of dynamic, separate, you know, kind of sales experiences out of our 2 locations. But because there isn't a lot of redundancy of like building and maintaining relationships, I manage both stores and I have buyers that work full time in both stores. And I get the benefit now of, doing most of the higher level planning with our farmers and things like that. And actually, I was just talking with Pete outside before we came in that just at the end of the week, we are already sending out our planning materials for 2022, as we're.
Is that that's what you're wanting to stock, what you'd like to see,
Yep,
and what the
exactly.
timing would be, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I mean, also just in conversation, it kind of occurred to me that, I've also had this experience where I've had a lot of interactions with other produce people in co-ops and in retail outlets, and I had the benefit of coming up in a co-op that had a fairly sophisticated buying program for local food.
And many years of it. So
Many long
they
years.
know that you want tomatoes in June and you just aren't going to get them.
Right,
You already knew
exactly.
that before you got there.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, I had the benefit of, coming into relationships that were already formed with a lot of growers that we've worked with for, decades in some cases. But I've also had the benefit of being able to see it from a different perspective and suggest some changes to make it a better process for everybody involved. So, we still, we buy about, I did just crunched a couple of numbers, but over the course of a year, it doesn't sound like a lot, but a lot of work goes into it. We purchase about 25% of our produce directly from local farmers.
I think that's a huge number, actually, when only 25% of the season is growing. So
Yeah, I mean, we've in the grand scheme of things, I mean, and I was telling Pete too, just outside that, I kind of, when I was looking at all of our purchasing from this last year, I exclude a lot of the purchases that we make through like somebody like Co-op Partners Warehouse that are purchasing from local growers, but it's not a relationship that I have.
they're getting it
forged,
from Southwest
yeah.
Minnesota someplace.
So that 25% represents, people that I sit down at the table with and have conversations with, and John's one of them. I think that it's allowed for, a really important, facet of our co-op to kind of flourish and continue. So it's just
Yeah,
been,
and I think, pointing out John, and he's had enough airtime, we'll let him sit over there. But, John is a fairly new farmer. And so that makes me think that when you were talking before, you were talking about these established relationships that have been going on for years and years, but there's still room in your marketplace for new farmers. I always tell new farmers, when you're going to look for a new wholesale account, know first off that they don't know you and they don't want to displace John because they do know John.
right.
And so even if you come in with cheaper carrots, they know that John will get them carrots and they're not going to displace John for you.
Yeah.
But there still is room for you to build those relationships. Is that a fair?
Yeah. I mean, actually, John and Emily were a great example of that in that, they have a relationship with our co-op. And, so thereby they know the market that they're trying to access. And I think that, that can be a really critical piece is that, if you're looking to break into a market, is that you educate yourself about that market before you're, approaching a buyer to hopefully forge a relationship. Because if you've walked into my stores and you've seen my department and you speak to that when we have a conversation, all of a sudden I'm going to listen, in a different way, I think, than just getting that canned phone call that says I've got kale or cabbage or, whatever, right at the time of the year where everybody has the
does.
same thing. It depends on what scale. I mean, we purchase from some growers that do mushrooms on smaller than like a forest scale, but we do rely on some of that as well.
Are they cultivated or foraged?
Cultivated,
Cultivated.
for the most part. I had to stop. Well, we've kind of pumped the brakes on buying foraged product.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a complex thing, but yeah, there's a lot of risk for us as where I can't. purchase everything personally. And so if I have to channel that through, it's,
Yeah, and Carla, back to that, the forged ones, New Scenic, somebody like that can look at them, use them the same day, and know if they're, that kind of chef-driven kind of place.
Canada Woods version is the worst example. I mean, you cut them in half and they're just full of little like worms.
Maitake, or are you talking about cows? Cows are full of worms, but not your cows. Sorry about that. Chicken of the woods. Pete, I'd like to, we'll get back to buyer side again, but could you tell us a little bit about your farm and your experience with wholesale? Somebody brought up the question of, my margins are so tight the way they are. How can I, really justify a wholesale sale? And so if you can give me, I gave him some baloney I just made up, but I'd like to see what, I didn't make it up. I've been doing this for a while. But if you could give us how you deal with the word wholesale and a little bit of your history.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Pete Skold. My farm is Waxwing Farm in Webster, Minnesota. And right now our farm is about half and half CSA and what we would call wholesale. For us, that's mostly direct sales to restaurants. We do sell some institutional sales. So like we sold to the colleges in Northfield, and this year we're selling to the Prior Lake School District outside of Minneapolis. But restaurants are really our main wholesale channel that I would describe as wholesale. And we started that when we were doing farmers markets and early on in our career, and it kind of started as my wife had worked at Turtle Bread in Minneapolis, and Cafe Levant was right in the backside of that, and their chef went to high school with Anna, and he was there. He was on the line when she was working there, so we just had kind of a loose connection to him. And so we reached out to him after the farmers market really one day early on when we had excess stuff from the farmers market. We were just like, hey, you want anything? So it was that same kind of thing, knocking on the door. And he was in that position to, take it and work it into his menu. And we built our relationship off of that, and then found that was a better fit for us than the grind of the farmers market. That was always a really tough thing for us to take that time. And once we started having kids, we decided that, spending our weekends up in the cities doing farmers market was untenable. So we kind of made that pivot to focusing on restaurants after that. But I think it echoes a lot of the stuff that you've already heard, that it's very much relationship building and driven entirely by that, I would say. The product is obviously very important, that it's, of the quality and standard that your buyer is expecting. But if you don't have the relationship and the understanding between what the growing season is like from the farmer's perspective and then what the kitchen is like from the chef's perspective, we have to be able to understand each other in that way, so that they know, like, well, frost is coming up, so tomatoes are done, as opposed to just like, hey, I'm ready for my 50 pounds of tomatoes that I get every week, and like, oops, I don't have it because now it's just done. So that level of understanding is really critical.
Do you provide an availability list?
Yeah, so part of that is I do a weekly product list. So every week I'm sending out an email, and it's a Google Doc, so I just do it all in one document. And I forward that out to all of my restaurant accounts, and it's got a brief kind of summary at the top of like, here's what we've got right now, here's kind of what's on its way out, here's what's coming on. I try to forecast as best I can, like, okay, it's beginning of June and hoop house tomatoes are coming on, and we'll have tomatoes until the frost, and that our frost date is usually, end of September. So you can expect reliable tomatoes from me starting now and going until this time. One thing that I've been meaning to do but haven't gotten around to doing, but I will this winter, is like a full-on product list, like with the whole calendar year of like, you can expect these things here. this is in spring, this is in fall, this is in summer, so that the chefs can do more legwork ahead of time to plan out their menus based on my product availability, so that they know that if I'm planning a menu item for the summer and I want to get eggplant, this is the time when I can put it on and make sure that I got local eggplant from Pete, and I know that it's going to be done at this stage.
I got one more question, and then I'll hand it over to Matt. That full year availability list, when you have the conversation with Nick, he's gonna be saying, like I was saying, I was growing Cardone this year, and he says, I want something like that. I don't have that. Then does that make it onto your full list, or do you like segment it out for different chefs and grow them something so that they can differentiate themselves in the marketplace as well?
Yeah, certainly. I think that kind of goes both ways. I think edible flowers are a good example for that. Like, we started off early on, and our chefs, just as we were building our relationship, one of our restaurants, Spoon and Stable in Minneapolis, they just said, hey, can we get cucumber flowers? And I was like, cucumber flowers? Sure, great. Yeah, I got tons of those. And so I went out and picked a bunch and threw them in a container and sent them up. And they're like, oh, these are all gritty and crappy. I can't use these. And
No, that's fair. I mean,
absolutely.
Want to know, as a grower, you want Nick and you want Carla to call you up and say, these are bad.
These are bad, right? I want to hear that. I want that feedback. A lot of times it's just, oh, they're bad. Well, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. And it's like, but we had that conversation of like, no, I need it to be like this. And so then we built into our plan growing our cucumbers undercover. So now they're protected, and cucumber flowers are actually like 1% of our gross sales at this stage, which is ridiculous. And nobody should plan on that being the case for your farm. You don't build your farm around expecting that. But it's one of those kind of happy accidents that came out of that, and then is a product that at the beginning, when we were just figuring it out, was just available to that restaurant, because that was the restaurant that we were invested in. And now after they kind of took a little bit of a risk on doing it with us, we've been able to make it a reliable part of our business, and now it's available on our entire product list, and a lot of our restaurants are buying them when they're available. So sometimes we do things just for those restaurants. Like, another good example is right now we got funded for a SARE project to do forcing radicchio and Belgian endive, and that is a really specialty product that is potentially a high value crop for winter sales. And but as we're just kind of like feeling it out, like the SARE grant is taking some of the risk off of our plates, and the restaurants are there, we have that relationship built in, so that we know that if we can grow this product, we can sell it to them, and they can work it into their menus, either as a one-off as we're just figuring it out, and then hopefully we can figure out a system that works for a long-term production. Like Belgian endive, we could potentially start forcing that now and have that as a specialty product all the way through to help to diversify our winter sales. And especially on restaurant scale, it's hard to sell 20 pounds of beets, 15 pounds of carrots. Yeah. Those orders don't add up. But if you can add a specialty product like that, suddenly your per order price goes up, and it makes it worthwhile to keep doing your orders through the winter, and takes a little bit of the pressure off in the summer.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're probably not going to sell a lot of those Prior Lake, but
Correct.
That's the winter storage on your root vegetables is going to, it's going to balance those out. Matt, I'd like you to introduce yourself, a little bit about Weicker Acres, what you grow, and some of your background and history in wholesale marketing and wholesale sales, and how that works for you.
Well, I'm Matt Wyke, the owner for 15 more days of Weicker Acres. We are in the process of a farm transition, selling our brand and our home and our animals and our equipment to another family that is 10 years younger and has 10 years of less wear on their backs than we do. We've been doing this full time for 10 years. Little known fact is that we started off doing vegetables and some pigs. And then we were approached by a through a long series of coincidences by a man named Mike Phillips that was starting a whole animal charcuterie program in the food building called Red Table Meat Company. And ironically, I'm a third generation pig farmer. And Mike's a Iowa boy that grew up in the same little town of 300 people where my grandpa's family farm was. So our farm is just a long string of coincidences all the way to the sale of this farm. But we transitioned into raising pigs for him full time, and I was so happy I didn't have to ever weed carrots again. And we lived really close to the food farm, and John Fisher Merritt was my mentor, and he probably thought it was a really good idea that we weren't raising carrots anymore. But, he had a lot of critiques for our methods.
But they've got, I mean, you can't argue with the guy.
No.
The guy just grows amazing carrots.
No, they're great.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful for that relationship. It was amazing. So for the last 8 years, we've been raising pigs full time. Started off with, it was funny, it just popped up into our memory on Facebook a little while ago that we had 80 pigs. And, you know, my wife's comment on the Facebook post is that now we're really pig farmers. Well, we had 80 pigs born last week.
Yeah.
Now, so we harvest. It's seasonally. We harvest 20 to 25 pigs every 2 weeks, and we distribute that in between 20 to 30 restaurants and 3 to 5 co-ops and grocery stores.
Are these being raised in hoop houses with deep
Nope.
bedding or on pasture? Or how are you-
We are on pasture, and we have a variety of shelters. Mostly for the winter, they use calf hutches. That is just a more secure, warm area than a hoop house, and costs a lot less money and is more mobile. The problem with raising pigs in one space is numerous. It's parasites. It's the ground disappears because a pig will eat 5 pounds of dirt a day, and then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Look, yeah, that's where they get their minerals, and they get a lot of nutrients from the bugs that are in the dirt. And I mean, I can see in the 5 years where we've been at the farm we're at, I'm like, look, time to lower the fences.
Where out west, they're raising the fences because of erosion into ditches, you know,
Yeah.
and pulling them out of the soil.
So yeah, and then we have a small cattle herd of. There's probably about 60 out there of cows and calves and steers as well. But and then we also, in addition to our wholesale market, which is the mainstay of our business, but about a year and a half ago, we realized that we had to change some things really fast because we had a lot of meat in the freezer and a lot of meat that had to be made every 2 weeks. And we had been experimenting with some direct-to-consumer sales beyond what we always have sold halves and wholes and stuff, but we had a test market of about 20 or 25 people that had been receiving monthly boxes from us, much along the CSA model, but we call it a subscription instead, because in our space, the guaranteed money of the consumer, it doesn't work out with meat, because for some reason it's just not as responsive that way. But people sign up they can get a box once a month. They can get a box once a month forever. They can come in and out. And then we have other things along there. So we developed, in a sheer panic, the day that the governor shut down everything, we flipped channels and we're like, all right, everything's going this way. And we built an amazing amount of momentum when people were not wanting to go to grocery stores and restaurants were closed, where we were delivering boxes to everybody's doorsteps, and we were able to take everything we had and then needed more. And
I got a question about that shipping. I was in a meeting with the Food Finance Institute at the University of Wisconsin, and they were saying that at the exact same time that happened, people's travel went down, so gas consumption went down, which meant ethanol went down, which meant dry ice disappeared from the market. Did you run into that problem up here?
yeah, so we don't.
Does anybody know the relationship of dry ice to ethanol? It's basically a byproduct Well, no, it's a primary product of the process of making ethanol. And so it was really interesting. And so I didn't know you'd shifted to that market.
Yeah, we don't ship with ice at all.
You don't? Okay.
We searched really hard to find packaging that we felt comfortable with shipping. Well, a lot of our stuff we just directly deliver it, but we are shipping around the country. And Bon Appetit magazine named us as one of the top 10 farms in the country to purchase from, which was like amazing. Had no idea that was coming.
Did
so.
it change your sales?
It changed our outer sales. Like,
Yep.
we're shipping to San Francisco and other places in California. We're shipping to the East Coast, Texas, and places like that. And Duluth News Tribune and Minneapolis St. Paul magazine probably drove our sales in Minnesota the most. And then it was really the greatest thing about it, though. I mean, our Duluth community is still our primary thing. Is that we realized that people really cared. It wasn't just a convenience for them. They wanted to make sure our farm survived. Yeah. And that was just an amazing feeling because, and I stray way off topic when I talk, so feel free to throw things at me if you need me to stop. But one of the things as a farmer that hits home to us all the time is that we not only get to have the privilege to feed people's families, we have the responsibility to give safe food. And for us in particular, humanely raised proteins, where from everywhere from all the way through the chain of the production, people are making living wages and the animals are being treated well. And we're conscious of our impact on the environment, and we're trying to capture carbon versus create more carbon. And some of those things are limiting and hard to do in northern Minnesota, where we can't get organic feed without making our food inaccessible. But it's been really cool that way. Yeah, so we have in that piece of the business is not directly owned by the farm. It's a partnership with another couple people, and we're working on starting our own butcher shop that will process and make all that stuff. So a lot of the stuff that goes off in our boxes is not what you can buy at the co-op, because it's small artisanal, small batch made stuff that's, thank you. Yeah, like, I mean, we buy scapes from local farms, Food Farm and Northern Harvest Farm, and make a garlic scape broth in the spring. And we made a blueberry broth with locally native harvested wild rice and blueberries that were locally grown from one of our friends that has a blueberry farm. So so I don't forget where that was all going to go. The most important thing you can do, because how many people out here are protein farmers? I'm guessing you're mostly vegetable. Okay. You got protein now?
We raised some chickens this year.
Oh, okay. Whether you're protein or whether you're vegetable farmers, as you're trying to grow your business, and you should always be thinking of it as a business, like, you're not giving your time away. You need to be making sure you're making profit margins, or otherwise you're just going to be another one on a long list of people that did this for a while. Value-added products, the 30 quarts of tomatoes, the gajillion pounds of cabbage. One of our most profitable things is we have a friend who takes our lard and makes soap out of it. And bone broth, and we make liverwurst, and we do, all these things those are all not co-op stuff, but, rendered lard. Always trying to figure out what you can do that you can make something that you can have it during your season when you don't have availability. For us, it's trying not to have any waste products and capturing and honoring the animals by using every single thing possible. But that would be my number one thing to tell you is think about, and there's commissary kitchens all over available. So whether it be making sauerkraut or kimchi or salsa or tomato sauce. I mean, we buy tomatoes when they're in large volumes, and we make huge batches of chili, and we make huge batches of tomato sauce, and we've got all of our approvals to do that and store it. I mean, there's a lot of complication pieces to it and government paperwork that you have to go through to make sure you're keeping a safe product, but it's still, those are in the value-added products is where you're gonna make the most money too.
And actually, I think for the vegetable farmer, if you wanted to freeze bags of 5 pounds of tomatoes, there is none. There are no licenses. You can do that as long as, and you can sell them to direct to consumer. So when you get the tomatoes, then you didn't grow them and you have
Well,
a
because
whole-
we're
Yep.
turning it into a sauce.
And it's got chili in it. It's got
Yeah, and
off-farm
whenever
ingredients.
You take something from a high temperature to a cold temperature, you got botulism concerns and things like that. And, you know, through a restaurant's license, there's a whole
Yeah.
web of really complicated stuff, but you can do a lot of that stuff. And there's people that will guide you through it. The regulatory agency for that in the state, who it's escaping my brain right now, they're really helpful.
Yeah.
Here's something, I don't know if anybody knows who Arlene Coco is, but, she's,
The Grandma's, who is this big corporate restaurant in Duluth, has teamed up with her, and they are going to start offering an online culinary certification. And Arlene used to teach Safe Serve, so she knows all that stuff. And so anybody who's interested in that, I'm going to look it up on my phone, and I'll tell you how you can find out about that. But that would be a less inexpensive than culinary school, and good way to find out about all that stuff that he's talking about if you're interested in that.
Yeah, I guess my only point was to vegetable farmers. If you're not adding any off-farm ingredients, you can do processing on farm. You can shred cabbage, you can cube squash, you can freeze tomatoes and still have it considered product of the farm, which wouldn't need a license or any kind of. It's when you start. Yeah, most of the time cooking, when you add any off-farm ingredients, salt being the number one. You add off-farm ingredients and boom, you're in a restaurant. So it can be a useful thing, especially for someone, when you've got the 40 pounds of tomatoes and everybody else does. 400 or 4,000 pounds, right. My neighbors were selling heirloom organic certified tomatoes for $10 a flat, because they
Right.
are pig food.
They're so fragile. Okay, here's this thing. It's at November 11th at 2:30 in the afternoon at what used to be called the Sports Garden in Canal Park in Duluth, but it's now some kind of wedding venue thing. But it's right there between Belissio's and Viker Distillery. And it's at November 11th at 2:30. And this is a free meeting where you can find out about this thing that I was talking about.
What's the name? Who's the person? Who could they Google?
They could Google Arlene Coco, but this message is from Tony Bronson,
Tony
who
Bronson is
works
from-
at Grandma's. And this one, there's a listserv of restaurant owners in Duluth. And if you called Tony Bronson at Grandma's Corp office and said, I want to be on that list, he would put you on it. Because there's like lots of people on here that aren't restaurant owners.
Excellent. Hey, so one nice thing that Matt did was a quick pivot, which was one of my questions. During the last year, how did you deal with the switch from at-home eaters to restaurant eaters? And so I'm going to hand it over to Pete here and say, how did you, I know you already had a CSA, and so you didn't really, but your restaurant accounts had to have shifted.
Yeah, so when the pandemic hit in March, we were all geared up to, keep selling to restaurants and doing our CSA mix. And at that moment, it went to 50% capacity, and we just kind of said, all right, well, 50% of sales is going to be gone from restaurants. So thankfully, because we had the CSA and because everybody was at home, we were able to pivot pretty seamlessly to our CSA. And at that point, we didn't have anything in the ground. So we were able to kind of rework our crop plan a little bit, but and just kind of take that 50% of restaurant sales.
Did you already have $20,000 worth of seed delivered to your house?
We had a lot of seed on hand, but thankfully, again, part of why we do restaurants is because it marries pretty well with the CSA model. So there's, we're picking the same kind of volumes and for our restaurant orders as we do for the CSA. One thing I was going to say is that we've learned over and over again is we've learned to stay in our lane as far as wholesale goes. Every time we've tried to move into the avenue of, delivering pallets of produce to one account is when we've run into trouble. Just because our farm is not scaled that way. We're really comfortable picking a lot of things and breaking it down into small units and packaging it that way. So
It also removes a leg from your stool. We found that problem too. We've had customers that took, 2/3 of our product, and then all of a sudden they have troubles, and then you're in big trouble. So,
right.
so always as many legs to the stool as you can have is super important.
Yeah, I agree with that for
Yeah,
sure.
the three-legged stool of sustainability becomes an eight-legged octopus stool of actual sustainability. Yeah, let's, I want to ask Nick what he did for the pivot and how he sees things turning now, and then we'll do questions right after that.
Well, I mean, for us, we braced for a lot of unknowns, as everybody else was, turning the same way. But I would say that we were extraordinarily fortunate in our environment that we continued to see strong sales. Now, we did have a component of curbside and delivery that kind of, infiltrated that we were already testing out, but that made a pretty quick turn for us. But we did not have as significant of an impact as we had potentially braced for.
Do you see now a reinvigoration? Do you foresee something that you've changed in your business model that you may need to pump the brakes on, or may need to? Or are we just stuck in this reality now forever?
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of things that are, particular to not necessarily my responsibilities within the co-op of running a retail outlet these days. That can be a little hectic, especially on the hillside in Duluth. But it's for my part of the business, things have been pretty steady, which I guess is kind of nice. And maybe that's because, farming is kind of steady in that way too. And just a little bit, it's just like another year, another planning session, another getting ready for, next season. So
On the meat side of the co-op, on the meat side of the co-op, I would say, I think the co-op's orders more than doubled for us.
yeah.
But there was that, because one thing that coronavirus did more than anything in the meat industry is it brought out in glaring, I don't know what the word is, reality of how broken the system is in the processing side. And we all heard the stories of the virus running through all of those places. So I know that, even the co-op does source meat that's not local, but it's still sustainable, but a lot of those are still owned by really big multi-conglomerate corporations, and they didn't have the stuff. So
Yeah.
for us, it was great at the co-op, but
Yeah, right now we almost serve to have more of a learning experience with the shortfalls in supply chain and things like that when we are sourcing non-local, because of everything that's going on and transporting product, across the country. produce in particular for us, you know, for me.
Fish and Desert Southwest. Did you, so now I'm going to open it up for, anybody have any questions? I think you had a question?
Well, I had a question, but I came in late, so I just asked Kyle the question. And he said, okay, I'll ask it anyway. If you've already said this, then
I'll just repeat it regardless. Or I'll make a new one up for you that makes you sound smart.
good. So my question is, Pete, your relationship with all these restaurants, and this kind of was spurred on by you, like, crap, I don't have that part of my business anymore. I've kind of catered to them, you know, to meet their needs. Now I have to pivot. But I'm curious about that catering to them part. You know, you talked about like some of these specialty crops you dived into a little bit, but are you like meeting with, you know, the buyer at the restaurant in the winter to say, okay, what are your needs for this upcoming growing season? Oh, this person wants red peppers instead of yellow peppers, or like, you know, how specialized are you making your growing plan for particular customers on the wholesale restaurant side? And
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that we're doing as much as we can in service to the relationship, and nothing more than we're willing to actually do. If you're trying to, like, a lot of these restaurants that we sell to are, you know, very high end and very specialty, and so they come at us. So to back up a second, we'd take, starting probably next month, we'll start doing our chef meetings, where we're sitting down and we're talking about, okay, how did last season go? What do you foresee as the, you know, like what's on trend? Because obviously their menus are changing based on that. But also like, what are you excited about? What did we grow that was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that you could do that. And I want, you know, I want that every week. So there's those kind of fine tuning things that you did do or didn't do. But a lot of them are coming at us like they get seed catalogs. And a lot of our chefs grew up on farms. And so again, it's that understanding of what we're doing, and they're growing stuff out in their own garden. So we're relating on that level. But if we did everything that they would want us to, and then we call them up and we're like, hey, yo, I got that, you know, 30 pounds of guindia peppers that you wanted. And they're like, huh, what? Yeah, ground cherries, or I mean, any number of things that you're like on your hands and your knees, like scooping them into a bucket. So I think learning your own limits and being really clear about your own limits of what you will and won't do, but also, again, in service to that relationship, knowing that there's going to be some things that you end up doing that are loss leaders to that. And again, it's dependent on knowing that, like, well, I know that you're going to order, you know, $2,000 from me every week. So I'm willing to take a little bit of risk in order to like just keep this thing rolling along.
So Carla, yeah, you've got your hand up. I was going to pop it over to you as the same question as to like that relationship building over the winter with your farmers.
Okay, I'm sorry, I want to talk about something else.
Okay, talk about something else.
Right before the virus, I just had an extreme crisis about this whole entire area. I mean, I've been working in farm to table for 50 years, and I used to be just such a total disciple. I just thought it was the best thing that ever came down the pike, but it finally just dawned on me one day that there isn't enough land and there isn't enough water and there isn't enough food in the world for every person currently living in the world to have their own pasture with their own cow in it. I mean, this system that we're talking about, like he just said, is very high end. And so there are some social concerns that I have about this that I have not figured out a way to address for me personally in my own life. And when certain people in Duluth, and I won't name them, start going on and on about farm to table and it's local and it's organic, I just sometimes just want to barf. Because number one, they're lying. And number two, everybody says these things, whether, whether they're true or not. And number three, this market cannot serve the majority of people currently living in Duluth. And so I'm not saying that we shouldn't have the meetings like this and that we shouldn't talk about these things we're talking about, because I think this stuff is important. But I also think that there's this other whole thing out there that we just have to recognize and try to think about. And I'm at the end of my working life, and I have not figured it out. So that's all I got to say about it.
No, I think that's a fair point. Matt, can I have my own cow?
It's, I guess you probably could there, but I mean, I understand what Carla's speaking to, and it's something that is weighed heavy on our minds because our product is a premium product, and comes back to the living wage thing. And there's a huge portion of our society that's not able to access what we're doing, and that's a hard thing. It is possible. I have a massive respect for you. I mean, you're my largest customer, so. What you do with our product is awesome, and you've been so amazing for our family.
Yeah, we use John's
Yeah,
fry too, but
yeah.
you know what we make with it? We make French fries
Yeah.
and breakfast potatoes. That's what we make.
Well, and with protein, I mean, my products are kind of the focal piece of the things that are on the menu.
Right.
But, so where this, I mean, I'm somewhat preaching to the choir, but it is, the industrial agricultural system was what breaks this and makes it not possible. If we stopped raising corn in the amounts that we do, and we started raising small grains, and we're growing cows in large numbers on pasture and holding carbon and stuff, all those things would be possible. And if the
Well, wait a minute, I want to make sure that I hear what you're saying. So you think that if they stopped growing corn and making ethanol and making
Stop subsidizing
corn
corn.
syrup and stop subsidizing corn
And
and
starts-
stop making corn syrup and do you believe that the world could be fed by simple pasture,
Yeah.
the kind of agriculture that we had 200 years ago?
It's, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's the same, but it's different.
I don't know the answer to it. I mean, I think
So,
it could work
the
in the
reason-
United States, but could it work in the rest of the world? I just don't know the answer to it.
Well, I mean, we take great pride in our country, whether we should or not, in our ability to model for the rest of the world what's possible. I can tell you in Spain, it's pretty similar to that from my son's living there for 3 years and the stories he told me when he was there. But it comes back to reversing where the subsidies go, and it's getting the right people in office, which we're fighting the money problem. So it's a counter-revolution, it's our hippie movement, to change. Yeah, I have too many skeletons, nobody would let me in. Well, I mean, look who we just had as president, maybe I could get in. But I don't have that many skeletons. If we change and we do things and we work with the natural ecosystem and we work where there is, and food's got to be subsidized. It's either going to be subsidized where multimillionaires, the majority of the farmland in the United States is an investment that, like, the guy that used to own the Timberwolves bought my grandfather's farm, because it's they're not making any more land, and they, whether they crop fails or not, they're gonna make profit on it. And if those are rolling back around to vegetable farms, like the food farm's a big vegetable farm. I don't know how many acres you guys are running.
We farm on like 8 acres.
Yeah, like, but if we had all the farmland in my neighborhood being used the way my farm's being used, and I'm only using a portion of it, I mean, our cows take up a huge amount of it, but if we had the people in the neighborhood growing small grains and grasses and running animals over those and creating fertile fields, and then vegetable farmers coming behind and growing vegetables behind them, and they were able to make a living wage, yeah, we could do it. If that money was coming out of the ethanol, sugar cane, or sugar beet and soybean industry, and big dairy and even big pork and big beef. And it was transitioned back into a place where it was when my grandpa was farming. For sure.
Couple thoughts. I wholeheartedly agree with you, Matt, and I think that it is possible if we change the system. And I like my one thought as you're talking about changing subsidies. So this forcing radicchio that we're growing comes out of northern Italy, and it's a cultural heritage piece there. And here I'm talking about it, and it's like I'm growing it because no one else in the state is growing it, and I have restaurant chefs that are going to pay a premium for it. But in Italy, it's a cultural heritage piece that they've chosen to subsidize. So in the winter, it's at every farmer's market in the winter, and that's the greens that people are eating in the winter, because this was roots that people dug for their cattle, and they threw them in the corner of the barn, and they started sprouting in the darkness, and they're like, wow, that stuff tastes good. So then we started. Well, but actually it's not. When it grows in the dark, it's not nearly as bitter as it would otherwise be. But the point being that they've chosen to subsidize that, partially as a cultural heritage, but also just because it's human food that takes care of people and is about health. So that's my kind of one policy piece. The other part, kind of getting back to more of what we're talking about here on this panel, is there is some money available, and there's been a lot of work. My wife has done a lot of work with the Farm to School movement through the Land Stewardship Project, and they had a victory in this last funding cycle for additional funding for Farm to School. And so if you all, whether you're growing vegetables or protein or dairy, went to all of your school districts and found the buyer at the school district. This is kind of what we've done with the Prior Lake School District, is there is now a matched funding pot of money from the state for schools to buy direct from local producers. And so they can then get reimbursed. And the whole idea is for it to be outstate, because it's been a model that's worked in Minneapolis. But a lot of people look at that and they say, well, that works in Minneapolis, but it won't work outstate. And the fact is that if we have dedicated growers and dedicated buyers, and then people who are doing the work at the state to create this money and it's a subsidy, but start subsidizing healthful food in our children's schools, that also is building up the local economy and these growers. That's the beginning of changing this system that doesn't feel like it works when all you're saying is like, well, I'm only a vegetable farmer that is working because I sell to these really high-end restaurants. Like, that's true for me, but I think there is a lot more opportunity that's growing, and I think it's still very much in the grassroots, nascent stages, but it's happening, and there's just a lot more out there, and it's building.
I'm going to steal this real quick. One other thing, because I think you're carrying a burden, but you also should be patting yourself on the back. I know how many farms you work with and how much you are able to contribute to the local economy, because all of our money stays here. And because of the volume of meat you buy from our farm, we were able to respond to Northern Harvest Food Bank and 3 different tribes this winter when they got grant money, and we sold them tens of thousands of pounds of meat at a reduced rate because they got grants from some of the coronavirus assistance money. And now it's carried on to other grants they're getting, and they're approaching us now. And we're able to sell that because it's a large volume, but we also, it's one way we are able to feel good about what we're doing. And I just delivered 4,000 pounds to the food bank last week, and they paid me for it because I can't donate it. But it all is a system. It all works together, and we're all like, you are the farm to table restaurant in Duluth. Like, and what you mean to our community, there isn't words for it. Like, it's really important. No, I'm serious. Am I correct? Like a foundational restaurant like that walks the walk and talks the talk. Yeah, not everything in your restaurant is farm to table. We get that. But you're not greenwashing either. Like, it's real. Like, I dropped off, I don't know, 700 pounds of meat on Thursday to your place. Like, that's huge. Well, I mean, but you enable us to do what we do. And then we are able to pay the people that work at the processing plants really good money so that they can pay their employees living wage and they have health insurance. And you know, it's so cyclical. So sometimes, you know, going to a knife fight with a spoon works if you have enough spoons.
I guess I'm just thinking about the people, like, that, you know, that eat at those places that have crappy factory food because it's cheap. I mean, I guess, that's, you know.
Yeah.
Not everybody's, some people just don't care.
Well, and also I totally feel that where you look at a city like Mumbai and you're looking at, you know, a billion people and you think, know your farmer, know your food? Really? Good luck with that. I mean, you're 20 miles from the nearest city park, let alone. So I don't think anybody is saying that this is a super easy fix, and I can't tell you how India is going to manage their land and their food system, and I don't think anybody else here can tell you how that's going to happen either. But
You mentioned the desert southwest. I mean, there's a very large problem down there and in California. I mean, if the California Central Valley and Arizona and northern Mexico and those places can't produce the food that they're producing out, they're going to be in big doo-doo.
Not if we stop planting corn in Iowa and Kansas and Illinois. And turn that into good productive land.
yeah, well, I also don't want to eat turnips all winter, so let's hope that they figure it out. And you can eat spinach, and apparently now Radicchio and Ande. We've got 10 minutes. Yeah. It was hot as hell, but we've got about 10 minutes left, and you had a question, so.
Very quickly, I feel this very much. I have an urban farm in Lincoln Park in Duluth, which is a food desert neighborhood. And like, I grow microgreens and edible flowers. So I entirely hear where you're coming from. So I'm not feeding anyone in a meaningful way. But I also agree with the whole, I am, you know, demonstrating how to grow local food and we're creating this economy and, you know, there's huge systems that I don't think should be on us farmers or on you restaurant owners. Like there has to be intervention by bigger entities, policies, and I don't want any of us in this room to be crushed by the weight of that because any of us individually can't fix it. And the best we can do is keep our businesses afloat. And then my question is a little more just like for like going to restaurants specifically, what like quantities are you typically working with? Once again, urban farm, so I'm very small.
So I've got that's two-sided, right? Like, how do you want to see the produce coming into both of yours? And that maybe that's the side to come from is, what do you expect it? You don't want the carrots to come in a pillowcase, right? I mean, and what kind of quantities on some of those top levels?
You know, I'm happy to talk about microgreens. I mean, a couple of summers ago, I had a couple of interns, and it's kind of a long story, and I won't go into it, but we tried to do microgreens in the basement, and the whole thing got infested with iron ochre bacteria and was a horrible disaster. But microgreens, I mean, I'd be willing to talk about microgreens and how we would want them. The way that we got them in my restaurant in Austin was like we got sunflower sprouts that were about this high, and they came in a flat, and they, you know, they have that sponge or whatever it is that they grow in, and you get that, and then you just snip them off with a scissor, and then that's how you harvest them. And typically we bought them in quantities of like 2 flats. They don't last long. They have to be cared for when they're in a restaurant environment, and I have had many flats of microgreens die in the walk-in because nobody watered them. I mean, I'll just tell you that. So they have to come often enough to where the prep cooks who can't wait to get out in their car and have their vape and their beer, have to deal with them. I mean, I don't mean to be cynical, but it's just a, you know. Yeah. But so they have to come often, and that's burdensome because delivery is burdensome. I mean, John can speak to that. I see him driving up to my restaurant, and I look at him and I think to myself, God, John, you and I are too old for this stuff. But yeah, I mean, microgreens, there's definitely a market for microgreens. I love microgreens, especially in the winter when, you know, when there's nothing else. I mean, what we buy is boxes of mesclun from Bix. That's what we buy in the winter, because that's all there is. But sure, I'd love to buy microgreens. That would definitely, you know, and I've got all kinds of microgreen plumbing and light parts that I'll be happy to give you. No, I don't. No.
Not in the winter. I'm not growing cucumbers in the winter.
Our customers.
Yeah, I would say from a grower's perspective, the Wholesale Farming Success book is a really great resource that has every vegetable that you might imagine growing, or most of them. Doesn't have cucumber flowers, but and it's like the standard case standards, and so it's quality, grading, case sizes, all of that stuff. So that's all broken down in there. So that's a great starting point, because that's what people who are ordering from CPW or Bix, that's what you're getting. You're getting the 18-pound case of broccoli. You know, that's the standard. Wholesale Farming Success.
There's also on the Good Acre, which is a farmer food hub, basically. They have the same kind of thing for expected, like a cucumber is this size.
Yeah, this is what a cucumber
A
is.
cucumber is this. It's not anything other than this.
We publish,
Yeah, that is
every season, we publish our specifications for products and pack size and labeling and invoicing. So I think that if you're working with buyers that are doing it right, they should be guiding you to what that should look like.
And then there's one more thing at the misa.umn.edu. They have a publication called Pack House Rules, and that gives you also some ideas of what should be expected from your vegetable pack house.
So kind of where I would go with this, whether it's vegetables or meat, is start off not trying to do Sarah's Table or the Whole Foods Co-op necessarily, but find someplace you can make a relationship with where you can test what your abilities are. How much can you produce on a regular basis? Because you can really, and the best ways is find a small restaurant that's willing to run specials. And whether you're raising chickens or you're raising eggs or you have 10 pigs, you have to figure out how you can move that product that's going to be beneficial to the person you're selling it to and not a burden. Because if you spent any time in the back of a kitchen, they don't have time to mess around. Like it's a hectic environment. I don't understand. Now I know, I mean, that's probably why they're in their car with a vape and their beer. But it's a stressful, high pace environment, and Ratatouille hits it on the head. I mean, I've had people, family conversations, I'm like, yeah, this is a Ratatouille chef. So, yeah, but just figure out what you can do, and then find somebody that is interested in building a relationship with you. And usually it's a new restaurant, chef-driven, and start off that way. And then eventually you can become the food farm or Whiteger Acres.
There's a guy named Bob Boone, who's the reader, and he wants to put a kitchen into the West Theater. He's the guy who owns it, and he's just starting out, and he wants to put a kitchen in there. He doesn't have any equipment, he doesn't know anything. So go talk.
Let me give you one more tip for wholesale, for new wholesale growers, is get to know your invoicing system that you're going to use, and go over it with that new company that you're just fostering a relationship with, and label your stuff really, really, really well. Date it was picked by, which farm employee it was picked by, which field it was picked on. Get those things into your normal day-to-day pack shed, like, something that you always do. Because number one, it's going to help with any kind of food problem. Like if there's a recall or something, you can say, oh, it came from this box, this person harvested, this is where the problem was. All of the rest of it is fine. Instead of having everything from your farm removed, get into that and discuss what invoicing is going to look like. Terms are like, there's a lot of restaurants are not standing by the back door with petty cash. That's not going to end. The school certainly isn't standing at the, so, and the co-op, right? They want to send you a check and they need to have it on, because they have to record it so that when somebody does get sick, they can go, oh, here's where it came from. So just some of those logistics, I know we wanted to get, I didn't get to those questions. I would have formed them as questions, but I thought I could go through it faster if it was just that way. Let's go behind you, Paul, first, and then we're 1 minute over, which is fine because it's the end of the day. You had a question?
Yes, was just a simple question, is pricing. So I know that there's like lists published every year for like how much a cucumber or a box of cucumbers should cost. But I'm not, and I guess I'm just curious how you as wholesalers and then you all as buyers do that, how that works. Like, obviously your businesses as farmers have prices that you need to meet, but so does the businesses you're selling to. So how often is it, I have this box of cucumbers, it costs this much, the farmer's saying this is the price, and how much is it the restaurant or the grocery store saying, I can buy this for this amount, and how do you balance that? Or you don't balance it, and it's one side telling the other.
So I'll tell you quickly how we did it in Wabasha County with the school districts, a couple of them there. We went, surveyed their food service directors, asked them how much they paid for 20 different items and the size of case or unit that they bought them. And they told us what they paid. And then we went to the farmer's market without asking anybody for any wholesale pricing, nothing like that. The actual farmer's market pricing, put them side by side and found out that cherry tomatoes were cheaper from the farmer's market, so the wholesale price was less. There were 5 items that just blind luck were a better deal for the school district, and it was giving the farmers what they wanted for them. Snow peas, my God. Like the price for snow peas, like the Bix price, was 3 times what the local farmer wanted. So, so sometimes just asking what the wholesale.
I was just going to say that. So here's, don't sell yourself short. Don't forget about your labor in the cost of goods. It's the number one thing farmers do. They can work sun up to sundown. They forget about their labor. Be proud of your product. You're not competing with Cisco. Have your farm story down, not in an arrogant manner, but in a manner where this is what we're doing, this is why we're unique, this is how we're beneficial to you, this is how you're beneficial to us. This is what we can do together in our community. And that comes back to starting with restaurants that are new to the program, showing them how you can help them, because, and this is, I mean, this, I don't have to do this anymore, but early on, it would be, people would ask me if they could get a discount if they put Whiker Acres on the menu. And I'm like, no, you can't have my product if you don't have put Whiker Acres on the menu, because this is what's going on. And now the Miami Herald greenwashing article just came out, and I think there was a few other ones, but do people buy things because it's Whiker Acres on your menu? Have you had?
I don't know.
You don't, because you're not in that realm, but.
I think that there are some people that like that kind of stuff,
Yeah, I mean, we are an anomaly that way, but
But yeah, I mean, we had Peterson meat because I went to a restaurant in Minneapolis and I had a hamburger there and it was so astoundingly different from any other hamburger that I've ever had that we switched.
I thought it was because I told Jillian that that's where she should get her meat from, and I brought it for you.
No, it wasn't, no.
You know, I was the one that brought Peterson to you for a while there. I delivered it for you. Yep,
Yeah,
because Andy's a good guy and we're friends. Which,
Natalie said that she knew him after I
Oh.
started talking about him.
yeah, Natalie would. But that brings me to another piece of it too, though, is work with your farmers. Don't go and try to steal somebody's account, because we're in this together. Work together, and I honestly, legitimately, when Jillian was looking for other meat, I said, because the burger you were getting wasn't up to specs, I said, Peterson. She's like, well, it's going to cost a lot to get here. And at that time, Peterson and I were processed in the same place, and I was happy to bring meat for Andy because it was beef. Yeah. So, but
Yeah, it is remarkably, it tastes remarkably better. And some of the tomatoes that we get, you know, in the season that we get from the local farmers, they taste remarkable. And if I can say so myself, the tomatoes that I grew this year in our garden at the restaurant taste remarkable. But,
Well, I think,
yeah.
I,
I mean, yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna give you all one last,
So,
parting, like, piece of, you know, information.
Hey, I had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Paul, go ahead.
So my question is quick, do you have much difference between frozen and fresh meat when you're selling your meat?
We sell 99% of our meat frozen, unless you're taking whole animal. It's just logistically not possible. We process.
Demand for fresh or not?
Tulavi restaurant in the Twin Cities, but they take whole carcasses.
Perfect answer.
It's just, I mean, the processing chain is so locked up, like, it's the same thing as, what's your time worth, what's your labor worth, what's possible? If somebody asks me for fresh of something, it's like, it's typically not possible. It's just not.
What would your idea be of how you would convince farmers in Iowa and Minnesota and Kansas to stop growing corn?
Government subsidies.
Okay.
Make sure Trump never gets elected again.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just, it's both parties.
Yeah.
Hey, we just had, what was it? Shoot. All the DFL voted against something that was a Republican bill in the state, and it would have been super beneficial to small farms, and now I can't figure what it was. Was it cool? It might have been. There's something really recent.
Country of origin labeling, which
Yes,
is,
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Cool, it's like, and then what's weird about that is 5 years ago, it was the Democrats' idea, and the Republicans voted against it.
This was something, this was different. This was, funding for small farm processing, and the Democrats all voted against it.
Yeah.
Why?
Because it was a Republican sponsored bill. Yeah, and so the processing mash-up, jam-up right now is gonna make it literally impossible for any of you to become protein farmers.
Well, actually, there is money in the current state Department of Ag for processing.
It was trying to compare what they're asking.
But they're teaching butchers, and that's one thing, one of the biggest problems, you can open a butcher shop or an abattoir, but you don't have any, you have no meat cutters.
Yeah.
So they do put some money into 2 different schools for that, so,
What they asked for, like,
yeah,
$100 million, and they got money.
yeah,
Yeah, it was
something along those lines.
Yeah, I would just say, just re-echo a lot of stuff that's already been said. I mean, know your farm business and know your limits and find a way, an easy entry point into a new operation. That's the easiest place to enter. We have another restaurant that we've been working with, Restaurant Alma in Minneapolis, and we were selling a little bit to them for a while, and then finally they came to us and they said, hey, we're consolidating and we're gonna just focus on our 2 main farms. And I said, that's great. It's not me. Do that. I'll send you my product list every week. You can order off of it if you want to, but I'm here whenever they decide they don't want to do it anymore. And I barely sell to them, but I still send them an email every week, and it's no skin off my back. But it's reinforcing that idea that we're all in this together. And showing that out there when you're out there, that like, I'm not here to take business away from anyone else. I'm here to build up something new. And there's a lot of opportunity still, both in new restaurants or farm to school or, even places like, I got a call from Bix. There's a farm in Northfield who has been selling carrots, Open Hands Farm, and they've been selling carrots for a long, long time, similar to Food Farm. And the U of M they finally worked it out to sell to the U of M, and they had to go through Bix for that. And so they had a bunch of hoops to jump through, but then they did it, and now all the dominoes are falling, and there's a ton of opportunity, and Bix is now calling. Like, I got a call from a Bix representative to say, hey, what have you got? I don't even know who you are, but like, what have you got? What could you sell me? Obviously, there's a lot more to building that relationship out, and it's not something that I'm ready to do, but it's there for someone to move into. And that's how we're going to change.
Yeah, they
and
started
get that
doing
stuff
that.
into maybe not Applebee's because they have a central kitchen, but into some of the like, mid-range restaurant groups. That's how it'll come
Big
in.
started doing that a few years ago. They started putting local right on their website when you order from them local. They started doing that.
So it's coming, and I think it just, it requires people being, ready to pound the pavement and build your relationships.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot more I can add. I don't think that's going to be unique, but I would say that we have for my part in my role in a relationship with a farmer, we have fairly sophisticated processes for developing plans, putting together pricing, specifications, and I'm happy to share that with anybody. So I have some business cards and I can leave them with you. And, outside of this conversation, you could feel free to reach out to me. And even if you're not in the market to sell to me or I'm not in the market to buy from you, I'm happy to show you some of our planning tools. So I just wanted to toss that out there.
All right, any other questions, or you have clapping to work and then we can all go home?
I just want to thank, and we got pork for lunch from Sarah's Table and from Matt's Farm and chili last night from the co-op. So